Hi you guys, and welcome back to another eReels video. Now today's video is going to be focused all around the results to the March 22 exams. Now by now you should have received your exam results, and I really do hope it came out as a pass. If not though, don't be too downhearted, learn from it and come back stronger. That's kind of what today's video is designed all around, because today's video is going to give you a breakdown of the examiner's report for the exam itself. Now, every sitting, every quarter, Skills and Education Group release a Chief Examiner's Report, where they talk through statistics in terms of how well candidates did or how well they didn't do. And it also gives you a breakdown of each question on the case study exam. So, I've purposefully not looked at this. This is the first time I'm going to look at it, so you're going to get my first time real live reaction to the examiner's report. And I'm going to be honest as I possibly can. Okay, let's get into it. Okay, so the first thing to mention is that we do not supply the examiner's report on our online portal. However, you can find it for yourself if you Google Skills and Education Group Transport Manager Exams. You'll go through to their webpage where you can view it yourself. So let's take a look. So here we have a Level 3 Certificate of Professional Competence for Transport Managers. In this case, we're taking a look at road haulage. So the examination date was, of course, the 11th of March 2022, and this is the Chief Examiner's Report. First of all, it gives us some general comments. It says the report below is intended to give tutors and candidates advice and guidance when preparing for future examinations. So first of all, it's telling you it's worth looking at because it will help you for future exams. It sets out to explain where candidates in this examination were or were not awarded marks for their answers. This report should be read in conjunction with further guidance given within the Skills and Education Group Awards website. Now I've got to stress this first of all. We do get a little bit of a misconception that we, the training body, provide the exams and the questions. Now we don't. Skills and Education Group are the exam board that we use. Now we have nothing to do with Skills and Education Group apart from the fact that we supply their exams. So you come to us and you sit a Skills and Education Group paper. They write it, they enforce it, they endorse it, they do everything, okay? Once it's completed, we package it all up, we send it off to them and they mark it. We have no access to the questions, we have no access to the answers. It goes on to tell us that 916 candidates sat the examination. Well, that's neither here nor there. It doesn't make any difference to us. In fact, I don't even know what that means. Does that mean 916 people sat the case study, or the case study and the multiple choice, or both? Or no idea. So disregard that. As is always the case, the pass mark for this paper was set as part of the awarding process. Right. Now, we don't know what the pass mark is. And I know that seems silly, but we don't. We know that the nominal pass mark for the case study is set at around about 30 out of 60. But we can't tell you that it is 30 out of 60 because it fluctuates up and down. Some sittings it can be as low as 28, some sittings it can be high as 32, we don't know. But we always say it's around about that 50% mark. Same with the multiple choice. The multiple choice is generally around about 40 marks out of 60 to pass. But again, that could be raised or lowered depending on the statistics when it comes to people passing and failing the exam. That is only ever found out once it's been marked. So it says here the pass mark in this case was set at 34 and 70.35% of candidates achieved this level. Okay. Well, I've just said there that generally the pass mark is 30. Now in this particular instance, the pass mark has been raised to 34. Which is a high pass mark. It's probably the highest pass mark I have seen in a couple of years. Now, that can suggest one of two things. That can suggest that a lot of candidates did well on the exam, or it can suggest that potentially the exam was slightly on the easier side, so they've had to raise that pass mark. But that's 70.35% of candidates achieving that level. That is high. Now, generally, on a national average basis, it's around about 50% of candidates will pass that case study exam. So to see a case study exam that's come out where 70.35% of candidates have passed it, that to me, with that pass mark being set at 34 as well, I think that suggests that they believe that this exam was on the slightly easier side. Now, I'm not saying the exam was easy, by the way, for anybody before you shoot me. What I am saying is just based on those statistics, the exam board have suggested that their line of questioning was on the easier side, and that's why they've raised the pass mark, and that's why that pass statistic of 70.35% is pretty high. It goes on to tell us that the multiple choice paper was also considered at the awarding meeting, and examiners concluded that the pass mark for this paper should be set at 41, and 44.9% of candidates have achieved this mark. Okay, so like I said, it's generally around about the 40 mark. In this case, they've raised it slightly to 41, which suggests that it could be, again, slightly more easy. But then again, the statistics of 44.9% of candidates achieving that mark suggests that it's still a difficult exam because we're below the 50% mark. Now, one of the big questions we get asked as instructors is, what's the easier exam, or what should I focus on, or where should I put all my attention? Should it be on the case study or should it be on the multiple choice? It's essentially an impossible question to answer because we don't know necessarily what your skill set is or what your specialist areas are, so it's difficult to give you an answer in that sense. But what you can see from those statistics is that the multiple choice exam is a difficult exam. It's a difficult exam because less than half of the cohort that have taken it have passed it. 44.9% is pretty low. Whereas the case study, 70% have taken it and passed it. So judge that as you will, okay? It doesn't necessarily mean that the case study here is easier than the multiple choice because your skill set and your area of learning may be that you take information on board differently and actually you retain information well and you're better at a multiple choice exam, or you're better at a written exam than you are at that knowledge retention side of it. So it's very, very difficult to judge. But my point is that from those statistics, it would kind of give you an indication that multiple choice exam is a difficult exam. So please don't underestimate it. It goes on to say a number of centres are still allowing candidates to use loose sheets of paper rather than the additional blank pages at the end of the answer booklets. Right, well, this is the bit where we or any other exam centres are getting told off, basically, for doing the wrong thing. We would remind centres once again that candidates should not use loose sheets to answer questions unless all of the blank additional sheets in the answer booklet have been used. So this is a bit of a bone of contention here because at the back of your examination paper, you have lots of blank sheets, lined blank sheets, and that's where you should be putting any extra answers. So if you've got questions wrong in the exam paper and you've had to scribble it all out and you need somewhere to put it, it should be put in the back of the answer booklet. Some centres are giving out loose bits of paper for you to fill your answers out on, and then they're having to attach that loose piece of paper to the back of your exam paper. You've got to make sure you've got your name, centre number, everything on it. And the trouble with doing that is that loose piece of paper could become detached at some point or may not even be included on your paper. So in order to get the marks, in order to get that question answered, it's got to be put in the booklet. Okay, that's the only real way to do it. So I'm going to make sure all of our invigilators and everybody within our exam centres knows that's the case, so that we're telling everybody you've got to make sure your answers are in the booklet. I've been told by the examiner. Where it's necessary to use loose sheets, they must be plain lined pages, not templates for any particular type of question, and they must be clearly marked with the centre name and number and the candidate's name and number. In this examination, an examiner received loose sheets with no indication of the candidate's name or number and was therefore unable to credit a candidate with the relevant marks. Now that is really unfortunate. Now that doesn't say that that's our centre, it could be any other of the centres around the country that host the Skills and Education Group exams. But what it does mean is that one candidate potentially didn't get some of their exam paper marked because that sheet just didn't have their name and centre number on it. And that is really unfortunate. So we wouldn't want that to happen. It's important for candidates to note that examiners will always mark the first answer given in the answer booklet, unless it has been clearly crossed out and annotated to show that the candidate has rewritten the answers on a different page. Again, we always strongly advise candidates of what to do in terms of when they get questions wrong or they feel they need to do it again. You put a strike through any answer on your exam page to show the examiner that you do not want it regarded in your answer. Once you put a strike through it, clearly indicate to the examiner, answer found at back of booklet. Turn to the back of the booklet, clearly mark the question number and then continue to answer. Again, you've got to make it really, really clear to the examiners where your answer is, what your answer says, and that your answer is legible so they can read it. And then, as long as it's like that, they will understand it and they will mark it. If they can't understand what they're marking, the chances are you just won't get anything for it. We would remind candidates that this examination is not a test of handwriting, spelling, grammar, or punctuation. But it is important that examiners are able to read and understand the answers being given. Marks will not be lost for incorrect spellings or grammar, but candidates are urged to ensure that their answers are as clear as possible so that every available mark can be achieved. And that's again exactly what we say to candidates, is just make sure that your answers are clear. Yes, not everybody's going to have the best spelling, and yes, not everybody's going to have the best grammar, and to be fair to the exam board, they're saying, look, don't worry about that. Just make sure that we can read it. Just make sure that we can understand where your answer is or what you're pointing at as your answer. And as long as they do that, and as long as you do that, you will get the mark for it, provided it's right, obviously. So make sure, if you are going to sit an exam with us again, make sure your answers are clear to the examiner. Right. So it says here, comments below for individual questions are designed to assist students and tutors when preparing for future examinations. So this is really, really important now. So what it does is it's going to break down all of those questions from that case study exam, one by one. And what we're going to try and do is, I'm not going to go through the answers in detail because I haven't got the case study in front of me or the question sheets or anything like that. But what we're going to attempt to do is to work through what the examiners have said about each question. How it was structured, where candidates did well and where they didn't do so well. So question 1. WeShift is to sell 3 of its vans and buy 3 new 18-tonne gross vehicle weight lorries and 3 2-tonne maximum permissible weight trailers. The company has already applied to increase its operator licence authorisation, and you are required to check whether the application was for the correct number of vehicles and trailers. Question A said use the information provided in the case study to calculate the minimum number of vehicles and the minimum number of trailers that WeShift must authorise to operate from next week, including a margin at its current level. And it says note you must show all your workings. Question B says use the information provided in the case study to calculate the minimum funds that WeShift must maintain to meet financial standing requirements. And again, you must show all your workings. Right, so let's see what the examiners have put. They said there that part A of this question appeared to cause candidates some difficulty, as very few correctly calculated the minimum number of vehicles to be authorised on the licence. In order to do this, it was first necessary to determine the number of vehicles currently being operated on the licence and then add the existing margin to the new number of vehicles to be operated. The common error when working out the number currently being operated was to not include the 4 vans with tow bar, which when used with the 2-tonne trailers would come within operator licensing requirements. So we always talk about, when it comes to the case study exams, the big 3. The big 3 areas being vehicle costings, driver's hours and operator licensing. Well, here you see is a big operator licensing question. It's getting you, the candidate, to understand what falls under the operator licensing scheme, what vehicles, what weights. And in this case, it's saying that actually candidates have found it fairly difficult to ascertain the 3.5 tonne limit. If you have a vehicle that has a trailer that takes that combination of vehicle now over 3.5 tonne, it has to be included under the operator licence, and that's where candidates seem to have fallen down on this one. It says marks were awarded for correct workings in this part of the question, regardless of whether or not the final answers for the minimum number of vehicles and trailers was given. That's really important. We always say show your workings. And the exam papers themselves say, show your workings. The reason for us saying show your workings is show that you're explaining to the examiner how you got to a figure. And in this case, they've even said, we will award a mark for showing us how you got there, even if what you got to at the end wasn't right. So that's why it's so important to get your workings down on that page. In part B, it was only possible to achieve full marks if the correct number of vehicles was calculated in part A. Correct answers to both parts of the question are given below. And there you see, it gives you a breakdown. Now, I don't particularly like follow-on questions. I don't like where you've got a question that you will only be able to get right if you've got the answer to the previous question right, because it kind of means that you can lose marks a lot easier. But I can also see where they're coming from and why they set those questions, because they want you to be fairly accurate. They also won't attribute a huge amount of marks to that follow-on question. So if you are going to lose any marks on it, it is only going to be minimal, because they know you've potentially just made a small mistake on the previous one, and that's why that's gone wrong. So first question, operator licensing question. Like we say, they're always going to ask you operator licensing questions, and we would expect you at this point now to know your operator licensing, okay? So if you did fall down on that question, get your heads back in your books or go back and watch some of the sessions that we do and get a good understanding of what operator licensing means. Just on that point, before I go any further, the operator licensing scheme is changing very soon when it comes to smaller vehicles operating internationally. We will be doing a video on the e-reels of that, but we'll also be updating you all on any legislation changes that come in from that and from the date in particular. Okay, question 2. The case study describes 4 jobs to be completed on Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday of next week. Use the information provided in the case study to allocate the minimum number of drivers to these 4 jobs. Note, you must give a driver name for each job. It says the driver allocated to job 2 will drive a 3.5 tonne gross vehicle weight van to the garage and drive an 18-tonne gross vehicle weight lorry back to the company's operating centre. Describe 2 different methods that the driver can use to record the time spent driving the van, and state the activity mode that the driver should record for the time spent driving the van. Okay, so my understanding of this question is that it's going to give you a list of potential drivers, and it's going to give you a list of their qualifications, I'm guessing, and it's going to ask you which drivers can do which jobs based on the vehicle licensing, I'm guessing. It says part A of the question was well answered, with most candidates correctly allocating drivers to the 4 jobs. The question required candidates to determine what category of licence entitlement would be required in order to drive the relevant vehicles and vehicle combinations, and then to determine which of the jobs, if any, could be done by the same driver. So yes, it is a driver licensing question. A few candidates failed to gain all of the marks by listing multiple drivers for some of the jobs. The question specifically required candidates to give a driver name for each job. Again, really specific stuff, but if the examiners have asked for that, that's what you've got to do. If they ask for a name, don't give names, just give one name. Part B was less well answered, with the majority of candidates not understanding that driving one of the vans should be recorded as other work. Okay, because what's happening there is they're doing some mixed driving, so they're driving a larger vehicle that would require a tachograph, but therefore when they're driving a smaller vehicle, the van, that needs to be recorded as other work on the tacho. Candidates should also be aware that when a question's command verb is describe, it is not sufficient to simply state. For example, record book. Okay, so where they've talked about how you would record it, people have written just record book. But what they've used there is the word describe. Describe how the driver would record it. So in that case, you would be required to write something like, the driver could use a record book to state the hours driven on the van. Because you are just adding a little bit into it. So again, that all comes down to exam technique. It's understanding those trigger words, or as it says there, the command verb. In this case, describe. If it said list, you could just bullet point. If it said state, you could just very quickly put something down. But if it says describe or explain, it wants more from you. And usually the marks for the question will reflect that. So a listing question will probably give you less marks than an explaining or a describing question. So use the points attributed to the question to help you out and understand what they want from you. Question 3. You are required to provide a driver schedule for the work allocated to Finn on Friday of next week. Use the information provided in the case study to complete the table below. Your schedule must begin when Finn starts work at the latest possible time at WeShift's operating centre, and then when the vehicle arrives back at the operating centre. You must show a start time, finish time, and a clear description of each activity for each period. You must show a destination for each driving period. You are not required to give tachograph modes. Okay, well, in most scheduling questions we've seen previously, it's always asked for a start time, finish time, activity and mode. In this case, it's clearly said it doesn't want a mode, it just wants a start time, finish time and activity. To me, that sounds like they're simplifying it a little bit. Jumping back to that 70% pass rate on this, now you can start to figure out why potentially. So it says here, this question was very well answered, with over 25% of candidates being awarded all 15 of the available marks and 63% gaining at least 8 of the 15. The schedule involved a straightforward UK-only journey with an average speed of 60 kilometers per hour for most of the journey. This obviously made the calculation of journey times easier. Okay, now I am starting to see why it was a higher pass rate, because the scheduling task they've not overcomplicated by the look of it. As it states there, it's a UK only journey, which means there's no ferry crossings, there's no time changes involved in there. And they've even given you an average speed of 60 kilometers per hour. Well, if you're going at 60 kilometers per hour, you're doing 1 kilometer every minute, and that just makes the whole working out of time a hell of a lot easier. As is always the case when marking driver schedules, examiners stop marking at any point where the schedule becomes illegal. In this schedule, a 45-minute break was required after loading at Chalrinkle. A number of candidates did not insert the full 45-minute break here, and as a consequence, marking stopped at this point. 7 marks had, however, already been awarded up to this point. Instructions within the case study were that breaks must always be taken at the latest possible time. Therefore, a break taken before loading at St Chalrinkle did not attract a mark. Okay, well again, I can see why that 70% pass mark has come out now, because this scheduling question is a lot more straightforward than some of the ones previously. Now, I don't know the case study, so I haven't looked at it in detail, and I can't tell you whether you've had to work backwards or forwards or at what point they gave you to work from. But what I do know is what the examiners have said there, which is that it's all in the UK, it's done at 60 kilometers per hour, and the first bit that they give you where they might trip you up, which is the break to put in there, you could have potentially already picked up 7 marks by that point. Usually, or maybe occasionally, they'll throw that little trip in a bit earlier, so you may trip up 2 marks or 3 marks in. But this one, they've given you the opportunity to get 7 marks before you even get to the point of being tripped up, which I think is a huge plus point for you. Let's look at question 4. You are required to provide a costing schedule for the work allocated to Finn on Friday of next week. Use the information provided in the case study to calculate the total cost to WeShift of the collections and delivery routes allocated to Finn. The notes say that you must name each cost item and give a total for each, as usual, to the nearest 1p. You must show all your workings. Let's see what the examiners have said. As with the previous question, this one was well answered. 32% of candidates achieved full marks and 70% achieved at least 6 of the available 11 marks. The question was a typical costing question in which, as long as candidates correctly determined the total mileage of the journey, the remainder of the calculations followed the pattern of many previous costing questions. The only common errors were to deduct the cost of the tyres from the purchase price when calculating depreciation, whereas it clearly stated in the case study that the purchase price of the vehicle excluded the cost of its tyres, and to fail to name each cost as was instructed in the notes to this question. Okay, so like we've said, big three: operator licensing question, driver's hours question, and here, costing question. They're all there. Now, again, I don't know the case study, I've not looked into it in detail, but what I can see from this costing question is there's not a lot to it. There's not a lot there. They haven't even broken it up into standing costs and running costs, and they haven't asked you to add any, by the look of it, they haven't even asked you to add any percentages on top for markup, or they haven't asked you to convert it from pounds to euros or euros to pounds. It's all, from what I can see, pretty straightforward. In fact, all they've said there is that the two things they've tried to trip you up on is making sure you calculate your mileage correctly, which you really should be able to do, and secondly, that they've thrown in the tyres when it comes to the depreciation cost. Now, if you go back and watch me do my costing sessions, or any of the instructors doing their costing sessions, we always make a huge point of saying, look, if it says it includes the tyres, take the tyres off. If it says it doesn't include the tyres, don't include the tyres. It's just a really small detail, but it can have a knock-on effect to your answers when it comes to your costing, which is potentially what's happened here. But again, I can now really see why that pass mark is higher and why that percentage is higher, because that's a pretty straightforward costing task, in my opinion. Question 5. As described in the case study, some of WeShift's drivers have complained about a lack of adequate resources supplied to them to complete daily vehicle and trailer checks. Give 8 additional resources or facilities that WeShift should provide its drivers to help them complete daily vehicle and trailer checks effectively. Okay, if this question were to come up on my exam, I'd be rubbing my hands together thinking, right, well, here we go, we can get some marks here. Let's see what the examiners have said. Most CPC examination papers will contain a question, the answers to which will not be found in any student notes, but rather will be found by virtue of the candidate using common sense, coupled with what has been learnt during training and through any previous industry experience. This was such a question. So, we've said before, the way these exams are structured, the big three: operator licensing, costing, driver's hours. They will always throw some other bits and pieces that you can reference from your study manuals, such as the driver licensing, for instance, that you saw earlier. But they always do like to throw a question out like this that puts you in that real-life transport manager scenario, whereby the answers, some of them can be found in the student notes, but what they're trying to do is they're trying to get you to think as the transport manager. Right, what would you do in this position? Tell us. You've been thrust into this, this has happened, you tell us what you would do. And that's what this does. Now, it does lend itself, as it says, to previous industry experience. So if you know about walk-around checks, if you've been a driver previously or a manager previously, or if you still are, you will have that background knowledge and you'll be able to answer this question easier. But again, that's why you need to study the particular modules that we do, such as vehicle maintenance and things like that, because that will help you in this kind of question. The question asks candidates to give 8 additional resources which could be provided by the operator. Examiners had previously identified 26 possible correct answers, and in fact, candidates still identified many more correct ones, all of which were credited with marks, which is good. They haven't just gone off their set answers, they've allowed candidates to think outside the box and create some new ones, and they've gone with them, which is really good. So a few examples of the correct answers are given below here, where we've got things like providing vehicle handbooks, torches, covered areas, allowing more time, a hammer, wheel nut indicators, all sorts. Now to me, when I'm looking through my examination paper at the start and I'm looking at all the questions, That's the sort of question I would look at first and think, right, well, there's 8 marks potentially available here, and all I've got to do is think of 8 things that I would use on a walk round check to make it easier, or I will provide as the transport manager to make it easier. 8 things, nice and quick. I mean, I'm not sure whether it said explain or state on there. I'm guessing it's more of a stating question because that's what they've given as answers. So it won't take you a huge amount of time to write down allow more time, torch, hammer. You know, these little things, and they're going to get you quick marks, but they're going to get you off the mark quickly as well, which is really, really key in a time-pressured exam. So again, to see a question like that, again, that 70% mark is kind of, you know, understandable now, because getting 8 marks for a question like that should be fairly routine. Question 6. WeShift may incur costs in the future arising from the proposed contract to make regular deliveries to Reims, which is in France. Name 5 cost items that WeShift is likely to incur that are additional or higher than costs that would be incurred on similar work within the UK. For each cost item that you name, you must outline one reason why it would be additional or higher. Now, before I even go to the examiner's notes, I can tell you that if you've done previous questions, if you've gone back through the Skills and Education group and the OCR papers, you'll know that this question has essentially been asked before. They're simply asking, if you're going to do international work, why is it going to cost you more to do that than it would do if you stayed wholly within the UK? And that's what they're asking you specifically. What is going to add to the cost being abroad than it is being here in the UK? So the examiners had said that 63% of candidates achieved at least 6 of the available 10 marks in this question. The only common error was to list fuel, maintenance and/or tyre costs as being likely to be higher, but to give the reason that mileages would be higher. Yeah, I understand that. The question specifically asked for costs that would be additional or higher than that would be the case for similar work in the UK. A mark was awarded for fuel costs where the reason given was that the cost per litre would be higher in France. No marks, however, were given for maintenance or tyre costs. Because yes, you could say that, well, if you're going abroad, then your wheels are turning more and it's using more of the tyre, but you could do just the same amount of mileage within this country. So that's why they wouldn't take that as an answer, or they wouldn't take maintenance, because you're going to be having to maintain your vehicles whether you stay in the UK or whether you go abroad. So what they were looking at was very, very specific answers that were relatable to foreign travel than it was to UK. So a couple of those I can see are CMR insurance, which is higher liability, or permits and tolls, which are required for foreign travel than they are in the UK. Telephone they've used as one, where you've got roaming charges, which is a bit of an out of the box one, but it's a definite answer. Currency exchange risks, breakdown or recovery. Again, that is a higher cost because your vehicles will have to be recovered from a different country. So this is a question that's a little bit like the previous one, whereby, yes, you can find some of the marks available in the book, but they're more putting you in that situation and asking you to identify it being in that position. So again, I actually think that one, you know, you should be able to apply common sense to that. You should be able to not even look in the book and think, well, why is it going to cost me more to go abroad? Well, obviously, you know, if my vehicle breaks down, I'm going to have to recover it, and it's going to cost me more to recover it from France than it is from the UK. You know, and just those little things. And again, for me, when I go through that exam paper, I would have been looking at that exam paper, and those last 2 questions there, 5 and 6, I'd have been banging some answers down quite quickly. Then I'd have been going back, looking at my costing and my routing questions. Okay, well, that's the end of that paper. That's the breakdown of how the examiners have looked at it. So you've got an idea there where the where the examiner believes that the candidates have done well or not so well in certain areas. But what I can say from experience is, having looked at that, now not having looked at the case study, but having looked at the examiner's report, I believe that was a generous paper. I'm not saying it's an easy paper, I'm saying it was generous in the way they've asked the questions. Because ultimately, they can only really ask the same kind of questions every sitting, just in a different way. I just think the way they formatted that paper is generous. The routing question, they've not necessarily made it hard for you. They haven't taken you out of the country. They haven't added an hour on or taken an hour off. You haven't had to get to the ferry port at a certain time. All they've done really is try to trip you up with a driving brake. And that should be fairly straightforward. The costing question, they've not thrown any complications to do with conversion rates. They've not thrown any percentage markups on there. They've left it in quite a basic format for you. So again, ultimately, I can see why the pass rate was higher on this case study exam. Well, that kind of concludes what we were looking at today, and that was just my particular reaction to this exam paper, and to give you guys a bit of a breakdown and show you how the examiners look at these papers. I do implore you to look at this yourselves and use it. If you're studying for the next set of exams, use it, because the examiners are telling you what they're looking for. They're telling you how they want things worded. They're telling you what they don't want. Now, ultimately, we take all this on board as well as instructors and trainers, and we use this feedback, and that's how we instruct you, and that's how we teach you and train you to pass these exams. We use what the examiners say, and we use it to educate you guys. But educate yourselves as well. Go through it and break it down yourselves by all means. Right then. Well, that comes to the end of our video. Now, if you are studying for the next set of exams, then please get your heads down, work hard, keep viewing our live sessions, keep watching our recordings, and keep using our resources, because we are always adding to it and we are always trying to better ourselves. We do appreciate your feedback as well. So on the Ops Support email address, please by all means send us feedback, be it positive, negative, anything that we can use to move forward. If you've enjoyed this video, as always, then please hit the like button, and it would really make my day and Enterprise's day if you could subscribe to our YouTube channel as well, so that we can keep delivering good content in the future. Other than that, guys, thank you very much. I'll see you on the next video.